Hello, my name is Lee Taylor, and I really like to knit, so much so that some of my friends call me the Knitwit. I hope you enjoyed today's video and possibly even learned something. So let's get started.
I would like to talk before we actually get to the video about a change in the way these videos are being made. First off, I got a new phone, so video quality is different. I had to get a new mic because the mic that I used an auxiliary, and I don't have that on this phone. So those both quality can change, but the biggest change is the episodes 1 through 11, including the two little half videos. So the first 13 videos of KnitBits was filmed and uploaded to my Google Drive, and then I shared that folder with two people, and I was making videos for them and for myself to record, but it was for them. So I said, I would text you the information. Well, it was for them, so it wasn't formatted for YouTube and a large audience. A lot of times I talked like I was talking to a large audience because I was training and getting ready and trying to go through all the little hiccups of learning to get ready for my YouTube channel. But I just kind of wanted to go over and let you know that things are going to be slightly different than the first 13 because now I am making videos specifically for YouTube. So if you look down in the description down below, you will see timestamps for the chapters at the bottom of the screen, as well as any links that I might be talking about will be down below, as well as obviously a description of this week's video. So I don't promise that videos will come out every single week, but they will be ready Saturday at midnight. You will be able to start watching them. So early Saturday morning, they will be uploaded and ready for you to watch, like, comment, and subscribe. I love getting comments, so please feel free to comment. I have added my email account that is specifically for this channel in my About section on my YouTube channel page. So take a look at that. So if you have any questions that are a little bit longer that you may not want to put down in the comments, or suggestions for future videos, hop over and send me an email, and I will go through those and get all of those ready to film future videos. So I just wanted you to be aware that some things may be slightly changing. So just be aware of that, and let's move forward and have some fun. Welcome to KnitBits number 12. Today we're going to be doing a stash dive. We are going to be looking at doing some swatching together. We're going to look at updates, and then I have a little bit of knitting history for you today for our bonus bit. So I hope you enjoy this week's video, and let's go ahead and jump straight into it. First off this week, as usual, we're going to take a stash dive, and we're actually going to look at 3 different colors, but they all go in the same cubby because I don't have a whole lot of either. So it's the gray, black, and white yarns. So let's go ahead and switch to the overhead and take a look at these yarns and see what I've got. In this week's stash dive, we're going to be going over my gray, black, and white yarns. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. So first off, we have, I'll zoom in a little bit here. This is Red Stag Fiber Company in their Cottage Sock. This is a light fingering weight yarn, and it's 75% merino, 25% nylon, and 100 grams gives you 463 yards. Again, light fingering, and the color is Castle Rock. Next we have Hobby Lobby brand Crafter's Secret. In their Idea line, it is an aerate 100% acrylic, and 453 grams gives you 810 yards. So obviously this isn't the whole skein, and the color is pepper.com. I don't know why .com, but I like that it's just more than just pepper. Next we have Hobby Lobby brands I love this yarn line. It also is an Aran, also 100% acrylic. This one, 142 grams, gives you 252 yards. And the colorway is linen. Fun fact about this is the color of all of my gnome beards. Next, we have two that are the exact same, just different colors, so I'm going to show them at the same time and go over both of them. These both are Premier yarns in their Just Yarn line. It is an Aran weight, 100% acrylic. 60 grams gives you 131 yards, so these are the entire cake. This one is simply called black, and this one is simply called white. Again, same brand, same yarn, just different colors. Next we have Red Heart Super Saver Solids. Zoom out a little bit here. This is a bigger one. There's tail coming off because it's actually, I'm actually knitting from this cake as I'm filming this. So that's why it's got a tail out. But this is their, again, Super Saver Solids. It's an Aran weight, 100% acrylic. 198 grams gives you 364 yards. The entire cake is all here. When I wound this on my ball winder, my ball winder is rated for about 4 grams. That way it's not super tight, because if it's super tight, wound super tight, it can damage the fibers. Well, this is 6 ounces, and I knew that I'd be working from this quickly, so I went ahead and used my ball winder and wound it tight and worked from the center. That way, as I'm working and it's, normally would leave a hole, I can kind of scrunch this and it will loosen up towards the center, so it won't hopefully damage, and it's all acrylic, so I'm not super concerned. The color is light gray. Last is this hank of yarn. I know that's kind of hard to show up against that background, so we'll do it this way. This is Yarn Bee brand, which is a Hobby Lobby line, and their Forever style, which it definitely looks furry, especially up here. You can kind of see it a little better. This is an Aran yarn, 100% nylon, and 100 grams gives you 219 yards, and the color name is gray. I have used some of this yarn, so it's not the full thing. It's in a hank because while it's super soft to knit with, it being 100% nylon, it's a little difficult for me personally to knit. So I just went ahead and put it in this cake, and since it's kind of fuzzy, it's just, the yarn's more prone to split, and it's just more hassle than I was willing to deal with at the moment, so I put it in a hank. Any yarn that I like the look of but not necessarily want to knit in my collection, and I don't want to get rid of it, I simply just put in a hank like this, so that way it's aesthetically pleasing. So let me zoom out a bit, and let's see if we can get all of these in the same shot here. Let's see here. We can do it. Okay, so we have Cottage Sock, Castle Rock, Crafter's Secret, Pepper.com. I love this yarn, Linen, Premier Just Yarns, black and white, Super Saver Solids, light gray, Forever Style, gray. That is a look at the stash dive for my gray, black, and white yarns. Next up in our video, we're going to go to the Swatch Lab, and we're going to be swatching together, and we're going to be doing a mosaic knitting pattern. That's just a very simple one. Mosaic knitting was created in the 70s by a woman named Barbara G. Walker. She was extremely instrumental in designing not only knitting, but knitting sweaters from the top down. And she was a very prominent woman in the 70s, and we still use her techniques today. So obviously she has had a lasting effect on knitting. When it comes to chart knitting, the designs that she did using graph paper and a pencil or pen is still, the symbol she used then is still a majority of the symbols that we use today. So a very important woman, and a form of color work that I enjoy using, and that's the one that I've used mostly. Mosaic knitting, it's very simple. You're using 2 colors and you're only knitting with one at a time. You're knitting stripes and slipping stitches. So in our overhead of the Swatch Lab, you will see just how easy it is to do mosaic knitting and come up with a very pretty pattern. So let's jump over and take a look and see what mosaic knitting looks like in the wild. In this week's Swatch Lab, we're going to be knitting a mosaic swatch together. And I'm going to be using this orange, this blue, and these needles. Both of these are worsted, and the needles are a US 5. That's my common. This is denim, and this I believe is just orange. I've had this color for so long, I no longer have the label, and I have no clue what the color name is, but to me it's just orange. It's a little bit more of a burnt orange in person. Anyway, so let's get started. I have a little bit more of the blue, so that's going to be my start color, and the orange is going to be the accent color. So to start off with, I'm going to pull out some yarn and cast on some stitches using the long tail cast on. So I'm going to, come out, let's zoom out a little bit, and I can zoom in as we get further along. Forgive there we go. I didn't want to see the edge of the table off over here. So give myself a good length of tail. We're only casting on a few stitches together. So we're just going to cast on 12 stitches, and that tail's much longer than what you would need for 12 stitches. So we're just going to cast on, and I'm not going to go in super slow motion on getting this cast on because I've done a video on how to do the long tail cast on. So I'm just going to get these stitches on here, and I stop every so often and count 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. For me to do a normal swatch, I would cast on more than this. Like if I was trying to check the pattern and make sure everything worked out, I would definitely be casting on more than 12. But for the sake of our demonstration, 12 is plenty. So I'm going to turn my work around, grab my other needle, and I'm going to knit a full row. So we're just going to knit back across, because I like the start of row, or the right side, to have the tail on the left side. Okay, does that make sense? So this will be the right side because the tail's over here. This is the wrong side, and you can tell that because the tail's over here. Okay? So we're just going to knit these back across, and I'm going to try to stay on screen because I usually watch what I'm knitting rather than watch what's going on the screen. That's just the way that I do that. And again, I apologize because my thumb ends up covering what I'm trying to do here. But I'm not going to explain how to do a knit stitch because I did a video on that, and I did one on purling. And you will be there's 2 different ways of doing mosaic knitting. One is you simply work in garter, and one you work in stockinette for part of it. So you would have edge stitches that stayed garter, and then you'd have the middle panel that would be the stockinette section. So we're just knitting these across. Very simple, no muss, no fuss. Okay, that last stitch is our slip stitch, and that's usually a little bit more snug for me. Some people will just slip that off and ignore it. I don't. I go ahead and keep it on there. That's just me. That's entirely personal preference. And when you are knitting, you are the boss. I don't know if you've ever seen Bob Ross, but he said in your world you can have it any way you want. And that's exactly how it is on knitting. If you're following a pattern and you want it to look exactly and be exactly like the pattern, well, then you would follow it exactly. If you're using the pattern more as inspiration, then you do what you want. Whatever makes you happy in your knitting, do that. If you want to be, some people say, a slave to the pattern, they enjoy following a complicated pattern where they have to pay attention. They knit a little bit, check the pattern, because stitches change across the row. Some people like that, other people don't. I don't. I like TV knitting, so I like very simple things. So it just depends, entirely personal preference on what style of knitting you want to do. So we're going to now get off my rant about freelance knitting there, and we're going to now add our next color, and that's very simple to do. What I do when I'm knitting, I'm going to zoom in here. What I do when I'm knitting the temperature Afghan is if I'm up to a new stripe, I will take and cut this strand, because I won't need this strand anymore, because I don't carry the colors up the side, because I never know how far of a gap it is. So I just cut them, which means a lot of yarn tails to tie in, but that's okay. So what I do on that is, let's say this is cut, okay? So nothing from here on is visible. I will take the new color here and put that on there like so. And I just tie a simple overhand knot like that, and take, make sure the tail's out of the way, and just cinch that up to the needle so it's tied in a knot right there, and then I just knit so it holds that color secure. What you can also do, which depending on what I'm doing, depends on if I do that or not. Let me get this knot undone here. I apologize. Let's get this. Okay, I had some trouble cutting off that section, so I just went ahead and I'm going to edit out all of that time there. So one option is to tie. Another option is simply to zoom back out here again, move my scissors off to the side. Another option is to go in like you're going to knit, drop your working yarn, pick up your new yarn, and simply wrap it like you would if that was your working yarn. Give yourself a little bit of a tail and just work with it regular. Now, when I do Mosaic, I like to knit a stripe of the new color, a full garter ridge. That's just me. I feel it's a little bit more secure. So in all of the Mosaic patterns that I knit, I make sure that I incorporate, I usually do at least two, maybe three garter ridges of the main color and one garter ridge of my contrast color. But again, it depends on you and your knitting preference. So let's get this knit across here, and we'll get this back, and I will check back in with you when I get back to the start of row. Okay, I just got back to the front, so I've knit an entire garter ridge with that. This stitch, since I did not tie this, is going to be a little loose, and so I just kind of snug that down. Now then, when you're knitting Mosaic, you have two options on how you do your colors, how you switch colors. You can take the yarn that you just used and moved it to the back and knit up, or you can take your new color or your existing color that you're going to be knitting and move it to the front this way, okay? Either way, it's going to give you a braid, so it just depends on what you want to do. I like taking the old color and moving it back out of my way and picking up and going. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom out just a smidge because it's a little easier to knit, especially these needles are a little bit long for this video. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to some double pointed bamboo needles, because I like using bamboo. So I'm just going to set this needle off to the side, and we're going to ignore that, and I'm going to knit off of this one onto this one rather than slipping all the stitches over to here and then working. I'm just going to use this as my working needle. They're the same size needle, and for this Swatch Lab, that's perfectly fine the way I'm doing this. So again, the old color to the back, and I just kind of hold that with my fingers like that, just kind of pinch it back, and the new color comes up the front. So we're going to knit 2 stitches in this new blue, and then we're going to do something a little bit different. Okay, so our selvage edges are always going to be 2 stitches all the way up. Okay, And our first section of pattern, we're going to do it all in garter, and then we will do a section where it's in stockinette so you can see the difference. I showed the difference of that of a finished swatch on a previous video, so I'm not going to go into super detail, but we'll see how the swatch goes and we'll go from there. How about that? So 2 stitches is our selvage on both sides. So our center panel, these 12 will be these 8 stitches here. Okay, so our first stitch we're going to take as if to purl, just like that, and then just pull it right off the needle. You don't work it, okay? You just slip it right off. The next stitch we're going to knit. Now when you take this yarn around, you don't want to pull that tight. You want to keep that loose, okay? Not super loose, but you don't want that snugged up so the fabric puckers, okay? And pulling it down like that helps. So then our next one, we'll zoom in a little bit more here. Our next stitch, we're going to go in as if to purl. Simply slip it right off the needle. Then we're going to go in as to knit, and we're going to knit that second stitch. Okay, again keeping that stitch back there loose, the yarn from this blue stitch to this blue stitch, the running stitch. Keep that loose, and again if you take and pull that down, that helps keep that nice and loose. So we're going to slip this next stitch, knit the next stitch, slip the next stitch, and then we're going to knit. Whoop, see what I just did? I pulled that forward like I was going to purl. I don't need to do that. Keep it to the back and simply knit that stitch. So we're at our edge, so we're going to knit these 2. I should have made the center panel an odd number, but I did not. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something a little sneaky. And that right there. So now we have increased a stitch. So now there will be 9 stitches. So we'll have, a nice border of orange between these. So you'll see why that helps here in a bit. So now we're going to knit these last 2 stitches. Knit these last 2. Okay, now I can get rid of this other long needle that was causing trouble and switch to my 2 shorter bamboo needles. So now we are on the wrong side, and you can tell because your cast on edge, the tail is on this side. The tail for the colors, or for the orange color, is going to be on this side because we started on the wrong side, okay? Because our beginning of row is over here. So we didn't start on the wrong side. I apologize. We started the tail on the opposite side. So we're just going to knit these first 2 stitches just like normal. Now then, we're going to bring the yarn to the front like so, like you would purl. Slip that stitch, yarn to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, yarn to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, yarn to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, again keeping those loose, yarn to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, yarn to the back, knit our selvage stitches. Now if you're not comfortable remembering what these selvage stitches are, definitely go and place some markers right there. I did not for this video simply because there's just a few and I can keep track, but if you're not comfortable just remembering that there's 2 on each side, put a marker there. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So now you can kind of see how our pattern is going. Okay, got the bumps and you got this longer stitch. and it'll show up more as we keep going, okay? But you've got these little blips of color where you knit them, and you got these lines of color, these vertical colors, where you slip the stitch. So now we're going to drop the blue, and we're going to pick up, get the blue out of our way, around here back, and we're going to pick up the orange, okay? And these edge stitches, we're going to just knit them, okay? Just knitting right across. Now then, if it is an orange stitch, we're going to knit it. If it's a blue stitch, we're going to slip it, okay? So we're going to knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip. Again, keeping it loose. We don't want that scrunched up where it's going to pucker. Knit, slip, knit, and then we knit our selvage stitches. Okay, now we're going to flip it around, and we're going to keep up with the same pattern like we did in the front. We're going to knit all the orange, and then we are going to bring the yarn to the front like you would purl, but just slip it from one needle to the next. You're just moving it out of your way. Then you move the yarn back to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, yarn to the back, knit, and again, keeping those loose. And when I'm doing it this way, I will kind of pull it like that, pull it apart, and that helps keep the floats, that's the word for it, the running stitch, the floats, that keeps those nice and loose so your fabric does not pucker up. So like this, and then when I go to do this, I pull it, whoop, gotta move it to the back. See, I'm getting distracted talking. Knit, slip, and knit the final three. Okay, now let's turn this around. Okay, see now when we pull this down like this, see how you have, it's similar to a checkerboard, but it's not exact. But you got this, it's vertical. You can work stripes in vertical using Mosaic. Okay, now let's work 2 repeats in stockinette. So we're going to move our orange yarn. I got these twisted back here. Let me get this fixed. And what I do when it's twisted is I just take whatever strand I just did and I just move the whole thing over so it stays to the back out of the way, okay? So you may have to move your yarn balls around. I don't know how to work it so that way it doesn't do it that way. There are ways of doing it. Sometimes if you take and flip the whole thing over, that can help. But you know, moving the cake of yarn around is not a huge problem. So we're going to knit these 2 selvages. Okay. If it's an orange, we're going to slip it. If it's a blue, we're going to knit it. So this is a blue, keep the yarn in the back and slip it. So we're going to slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit all the way across, okay? And this is the simplest form of Mosaic. It can be, it can do a lot of very intricate patterns. It's very good at geometric patterns. So we're going to go along, and now, since we're doing stockinette, now when we work back across, we're going to be purling. So we're going to knit our 2 edge stitches, our 2 selvages on either side, but we're going to purl when we come across here. So we'll see how that looks, okay? Knit our 2 edge stitches. Now we're going to bring the yarn to the front, and it's going to stay in the front the entire time, okay? We're going to slip this stitch as if to purl, and then we're going to purl this stitch, okay? Slip this stitch as if to purl, purl that stitch. So we're going to slip the orange and purl the blues, okay? So see, you're adding colors to it, but you're only using one color. You're only knitting with one color at a time. Now I know I'm saying knitting while we're purling, but knitting can be used collectively for knits and purls if you're working everything together. It can be confusing if you don't knit. That's just the way it is. That's just the way people are. They like to complicate things. So we're to our 2 selvage stitches. So we're going to take the yarn to the back and knit those. And when we turn this over, you can't tell just yet. I mean, you can start seeing the V's, but when we work another repeat, you'll be able to tell that there's a difference between this and this. But let's look up close real quick. See these? Let's zoom in instead of me holding that up and grab the yarn wand. Zoom in really close. Whoops, off screen there. See these stitches right here, these blue that we slipped? See how they're a lot longer than the ones we've worked here? So that's where we've worked, that's where we've slipped, that's where we've worked. That's where we've worked, that's where we've slipped, that's where we've worked. That's where we worked, slipped, worked. Do you see that? How that works? How that's more elongated there? That is what Mosaic does, is it stretches that across the 2 rows and then you work it the next time. So it elongates those stitches, and by slipping with that color, you can take that all the way up. So you can make vertical stripes coming up using Mosaic. So let's continue on with our pattern. Okay, so the blue is going to go to the back. Okay, blue's going to the back, and we're going to knit with the orange. Get the yarn tail out of our way. So we're going to, now that we're using orange, we're going to knit the oranges and slip the blues, except for our selvage. We're going to knit our 2 selvages, knit the orange, slip the blues all the way across. So let's get that going. Again, we drop the blue, pick up the orange, get my yarns. I am so sorry about bumping and hitting all of this today. So we're going to knit these 2 selvages. Oh, don't split your yarn. Okay, now we're going to knit the orange. And again, this is the most basic pattern. I will do another video, not next week, but the week after. And I'll show you more in depth or a more complex mosaic knitting and show you some things of what it can and cannot do. So again, as we go across, we're knitting the orange and we're slipping the blue all the way across on the right side. Whoop. Slip it purlwise. You can slip it knitwise, but that will twist your stitch. And if that's the look you're going for, go for it. If not, slip it purlwise. And unless it's stated, 9 times out of 10, if it says to slip a stitch, it means slip it purlwise. Okay, now on the back, we're going to be purling the oranges, except for our 2 selvages. We'll knit those, then purl the oranges, and simply slip the blues with the yarn in front. If you put it in the yarn in back, you're going to see the little blip over the blue, and that's going to be counterproductive for what we're trying to do. So let's knit these 2 edge stitches. Now then we're going to move the yarn to the front, and I just hold that there with my thumb so it doesn't flop. And we're going to purl the orange, slip the blue. Oh, see, look there, I'm trying to knit. Purl the orange. There we go, my yarn flopped off my hand. Purl the orange, slip the blue. I don't purl a whole lot, so it's not my default. When I see a stitch, I just automatically default think knit, because I work a lot of garter. I like working garter because, again, that's TV knitting. I don't have to think about it. I just work the stitch. So this one we're going to work because we only have 2 selvages, so we're going to purl that stitch. Okay, purl, move the yarn to the back, and knit those 2. Okay, so we've done that. Let's take a look at our work now. Zoom in. So you can see now, using only one color at a time, that we can do some color work very simply. In this case, again, we're just doing vertical stripe colors. Okay? This section up here in stockinette, this down here in garter. So that is a very brief look into mosaic knitting. Now, to end this off, you would drop your orange because you're done with that one, and you'd pick up your blue and you knit a stripe. Actually, to keep it symmetrical, you would keep using the orange and you would knit all the way across and back, and then you would knit in blue and then bind off, and that would be your little swatch. So that's a very brief look into mosaic knitting. Again, not next video, but the video after, I will show you a little bit more advanced mosaic and what it can and cannot do. In our next clip, we're going to take a look at the temperature Afghan and the progress that I've gotten for that, because I finally made some. And we're going to look at the projects that I currently have going throughout the month of August. There are 4 different gnomes, and it is knit for a neighbor of mine as a Christmas gift to her grandkids. So they do not count in the Newman gnomes back here, and they will not have the names Newman, and I actually have not named them, and I've grouped them all into one project on my Ravelry page. So it counts as one project. But for me, I'm counting them as 4 separate projects. I just didn't want to clutter up my Ravelry page with a gajillion gnomes, since each of the Newman gnomes on Ravelry page is their own individual project, which counts towards my goal of knitting 25 projects for this year. So let's go ahead and switch over to the overhead, and I'll show you the process or in the projects that I've completed. First up, we're going to take a look at the temperature Afghan, and I will put a picture of that here. And that was the progress for the month of July. I finally got caught up to the month of July. I am very far behind, as you can imagine, since it's, the end part of August. But that's okay, because that gives me plenty of knitting to do on days where I don't feel like mentally working on a project that's kind of more complicated. I can just fly through and knit a bunch of that all in one chunk. So that is the update on the temperature Afghan. And next up, we'll take a look and see what I've got done on gnomes. As I mentioned in the overview of the project update section, I am working on 4 gnomes at the same time. And the way I'm doing these is I'm knitting all 4 hats at the same time, then I'm knitting all 4 bodies, then all 4 noses, and then all 4 beards. So each gnome has 4 parts, and since there's 4 of them, that's 16 parts, and I'm grouping it up. All the beards, all the noses, all the bodies, all the hats. So I am a quarter of the way done, because I've gotten all the hats done, and I'm working on the body of one of them, which we will see here in the overhead here in just a second. But as I mentioned, I'm knitting these as a Christmas gift by request of my neighbor for her 4 grandkids. There'll be 3 girl gnomes and 1 boy gnome, and she picked out the colors of the hats, and I just did the same color on all of them for the bodies, or what I call the butts, because that's just basically what you're doing, is just knitting the little gnome butt. And so that's what I have going this month on projects. So let's go ahead and jump over to the overhead, and I'll show you the gnomes more up close and personal. As I mentioned in the overview, I have 4 gnome projects going on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight in. We're going to start with the boy gnome. This is knit with denim. Oh goodness, I've forgotten the color now. It's not denim splash, but it's something along those lines. And as you can see, it's a bluish gray, almost heathery look. I didn't want something that was super bright blue, and you'll see why here in a second. So I just wanted something kind of muted that was, again, this is for a boy gnome, and she specifically asked for blue, and I just wanted something that was a little bit, that would be a good color as the person ages. I don't know what the recipient's ages are, so I didn't want something that was super cartoony. If it's going to a, 20s, 30s year old man, he might not want a cartoony gnome. So there's the boy gnome. Next, we have the first of the girl. This one I didn't mind doing brighter. And this is actually done in all cotton. And the color is Flamingo Splash. And I'm going to do these like this, so they fit better across the screen. Zoom out here in a bit. We'll use the yarn wand here in a second. Next we have Pale Orchid. Again, more of a muted. And the final one reminds me of a baby elephant that you would find like in a child's nursery. And it's this one here. And as you can see, I'm working on this. So this is the light gray that we've seen in the stash dive. That's where the tail ends, is right here. But it's a very, very pale pink white, and it's got some speckles of some dark in there. And it just reminds me like they might do the elephant's ear, or the inside of the elephant's ear. And then the fact that it's gray on the bottom just kind of adds to that. So those are where I'm at on the 4 gnomes. Now I do want to mention, sorry, little earthquake there going on. You can very easily see, especially on this one, with the marled, it's easier for those increases to kind of hide, and especially in dark yarns. But in a solid color that's a little bit brighter, you can see where these little increases are. They appear like holes on the screen, but when you put your hand in there, you don't see the holes any more than you see through the rest of the deal. I mean, if you really stretch it out, you can see my finger in there, but just in general, and just for a gnome, the designer of the gnomes has specifically said, even if you mess up and you forget like 3 increases on this section and you do all of the other ones, and it's a little wonky right there, because that would just come out straight and then come out, that's okay, because, as she put, wonkiness is gnominess. So if the band doesn't look super pretty, like this one right here, I'm not a fan of that little bump. That's okay. You know what I do with that? I put that to the back, and I make this side the front, and then you never see it anyways. But again, wonkiness is gnominess. So on this one here, I am to the part in the pattern where I will do a round of purl stitches, so it makes a garter ridge, and then I start working decreases. So I'm very close to the end of this, and it's about time to be stuffed. They will all have the same color beard and nose as all of my other gnomes. But again, these are not named, because I don't know the names of the recipients, or I would name the gnomes those names. And it's not part of the Newman clan. It's just a gnome. So those are my updates on my gnomes. And you already seen a picture of the Temperature Afghan, also known as Take My Temp, and Carter, and the TA. So that's what we have this week on project updates. In our bonus bits section this week, I want to talk about the history of knitting. Not my knitting history, but the actual history of knitting itself. And I've got all of that information down here on my tablet, so if I look down, I'm just making sure that I've got the correct information. So knitting is believed to have started around the 5th century. We know for sure 5th century on, but it may have been further back and we just don't have record of it, which is entirely possible. Because a lot of times social history, they don't write down, your day-to-day things. It's, history as a general is usually more wars and emperors and rulers and that sort of thing. So not a whole lot of social history is always recorded, and that's where knitting would fit. That's your day-to-day projects of simply surviving and having clothes for your family. So that's not always recorded very well, but it's believed to start around the 5th century in the Middle East, and the oldest artifacts is a pair of socks from the 11th century in Egypt. And some say it's knitting, and some say it's another process that's very similar to knitting, but it's not technically knitting. So there's a little bit of a gray area on if that's the oldest knitted article that we have. Some sites say it is, and some sites say it's not, so I'm giving you the information that I have. But it wasn't until the 1920s that knitting for fashion started. Before that, it was simply a practicality. I need clothes, here's what it is. But starting in the 1920s, knitting started being, okay, well, I've got this, it's practical, but it's also, now I'm going to make it look pretty, or more decorative, rather. Not necessarily pretty, but just more decorative. And not always necessarily even practicality's sake. Now they're knitting, maybe a summer cardigan, wrap or a shawl that's just for looks, just for aesthetic, not necessarily something to keep out the cold. Before that, it was definitely utilitarian, or fashion for royalty or high levels of clergy. Even in Latvian, they had to knit mittens, and those can be very intricate in design. But for the most part, it was utilitarian, again, except for royalty or someone of very high standing. Then it could be a little bit more fashion, because they were expected to look more fashionable. So for them it was, but for the average person, it was definitely more utilitarian. There were some very intricate items knit by various knitting guilds. But again, those would have been, for the knitting guild to have done it, it would have been more specialty items rather than just your general day-to-day thing. Knitting was definitely important for the World War I war effort, in particular the socks. Men were going through socks like crazy. They may have lasted, just a week. And there's a lot of soldiers in World War I, and the socks are only lasting a week, so they needed a lot of socks. So anyone who was not in service fighting was asked to be patriotic by knitting socks for the soldiers overseas. And a lot of that was definitely American, but there was also a lot of English people that were knitting for the war effort. So men, women, and children that were not in battle were asked to knit, to be patriotic, and knit socks for the troops to keep them going. So there's a little bit, just a little snippet of knitting history, that it was very utilitarian until, except for royalties and high ranking, until the 1920s, and then it became fashionable. And a little bit before that, during World War I, it was knit, again, utilitarian, because the soldiers were going through socks so quickly, because it was, a lot of foot traffic and muddy, wet areas, and it just needed socks knit up multiple times. So that's a little glance back into knitting history, and I hope you enjoyed this video section and learned something. In our wrap-up section, I just want to reiterate what we went over. We did a stash dive of the gray, white, and black yarns. We did a swatch together of mosaic knitting that was created by Barbara G. Walker in the 70s. We looked at my project updates, and we talked about some knitting history, and most importantly, at the very beginning of the video, I discussed the change in the format that I'm doing these videos from, where I was sending it to my Google Drive just for a couple of people to now I'm uploading to YouTube, and how I'm having to change the ways that I talk and the way that I do things. And so that's what we have for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you picked up needles and joined in with me. But above all, I hope you enjoyed yourself. So until next video, keep knitting.